Hi there, this is Maryal Concepcion, your host of the My DPC Story podcast. Have you or someone you care about ever been burned by the U.S. healthcare system? If so, you are listening to the right video, because if you are listening, chances are the answer is yes. But the U.S. spends so much on healthcare. Why are so many Americans affected personally and especially financially by the healthcare system? Shouldn't that mean we have better healthcare access and treatment options? Shouldn't it be easy for us to be able to see our doctor when we need to instead of turning to the ER or urgent care? Historically, it's been seemingly impossible to answer these questions. But now that is changing through the direct primary care movement. This video that you have tuned into will bring you into the world of direct primary care and show you how physicians all over the country are changing the way they practice so patients from all backgrounds get the high quality care they need and deserve, which makes for both happy patients and physicians. Learn even more by subscribing to the My DPC Story YouTube channel. Find us on all major podcast platforms. Find us on socials at My DPC Story and at mydpcstory.com. There you can find resources including how to find a DPC doctor near you, conferences about DPC, DPC startup guides and advice, a store with DPC swag, and even a mapper showing where podcast guests are practicing. Thanks for tuning in to hear about this powerful movement. Now, on to the episode. Direct primary care is an innovative, alternative path to insurance-driven healthcare. Typically, a patient pays their doctor a low monthly membership and, in return, builds a lasting relationship with their doctor and has their doctor available at their fingertips. Welcome to the My DPC Story podcast, where each week you will hear the ever-so-relatable stories shared by physicians who have chosen to practice medicine in their individual communities through the direct primary care model. I'm your host, Maryal Concepcion, family physician, DPC owner, and former fee-for-service doctor. I hope you enjoy today's episode and come away feeling inspired about the future of patient care, direct primary care.
Direct primary care embodies the reasons we all entered this profession in the first place. Better relationships with our patients, better care for our patients, and the professional satisfaction to do the medicine we were all trained to do as family physicians. I am Dr. Janine Rodems of Santa Cruz Direct Primary Care, and this is my DPC story.
In March of 2019, just after I had learned about DPC as a model, I attended the California Academy of Family Practice annual meeting, and there was Dr. Rodems sitting alone at a table with the marker that read simply DPC. We started chatting, and I picked her brain for about an hour and a half, and she became the first DPC doctor I ever met and learned from. Dr. Rodems is a graduate of UC Santa Cruz and completed her medical degree and residency at UCLA School of Medicine. She is an active member of the local physician community in Santa Cruz County, as well as the California Academy of Family Physicians. She is married and has one daughter who recently started college. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Rodems.
Thank you, Maryal. I appreciate being here.
I wanted to say a belated congratulations because now you've been open over 4 years, which is a huge achievement.
Thank you. Yes, we are halfway into our 5th year, and we are going strong. We love the model of care, and our business model is doing great.
I wanted to bring you back to your days when you were in fee-for-service before you made the decision to switch over to DPC. Can you tell us a little bit about how you made that decision to make the transition over to DPC?
Yes, this goes back to 2013. I had been in private practice in the late 2010s when private practice was beginning to sort of fall apart. And I wound up going back after about 8 years in private practice back into the big group model because we were sort of flailing, and realized that that big group model really was not providing the care, was very much, numbers game, number of patients through the door. And I was trying to come up with strategies when I started with them in November of 2012 of how am I going to continue to work in medicine for the next decade, tolerating this model, because it was clear the private practice model was failing. And in May of 2013, as I was 6 months or so into this 2-year contract, I saw the transformative webinar that was done by Erica Bliss, and I think both Josh Umber and Doug Nunemaker were in that webinar. It was put forward by the Academy. And I heard what they were doing in the model, and at first I sort of didn't believe it. And I was convincing myself that the model, you couldn't do it in California. It's great that they're able to get away with these things in the Midwest, but it wasn't going to be doable here in this state because of the level of regulation in this state. And I've listened to their it was interesting. I listened to their podcast through the summer, and it wasn't until the AAFP Assembly, National Assembly and the Scientific Assembly, when both Josh and Doug were there presenting about the model of care in one of the side lecture areas, and they basically got cornered by a whole group of physicians who pretty much grilled them for at least another hour outside of the 45-minute time frame they had. And that was actually, in that group was where Julie Gunther was listening about what this was and how to do it. And she became motivated after listening to that to develop her model. I still had another year plus on my contract. So between that meeting and one of my former professors who was also at that meeting in family medicine from UCLA, basically saying that he thought the model was going to revitalize family medicine, and if he wasn't doing the work he was doing at the time, he would be out there opening these things left and right. It's where we should go. And that was kind of the motive, the impetus for me to really start thinking about how could I put this together. And, my 2-year contract, I had some time to think about how I was going to construct it, either by myself or with a group. I attended the second National DPC Summit in 2014, the beginning of summer. And at that point, I started putting together a strategy to see if I could develop a practice. Initially, I was thinking of trying to help convert one of the struggling practices. There were still a few established practices in our area who hadn't quite gone under yet, to see if I could help with converting a group into the model, because I thought that would be the most efficient way to do it. And I did a presentation of all the information I had from the DPC Summit, and the group that I approached, half of them kind of got it and thought, yeah, this would be a great thing to do. And the other half of them were too scared about the model and basically jumping off of the insurance wheel. So I had to then strategize that either I was going to do this myself and finally turned in my 90-day notice and came out of my contract in November of 2014 and spent that next year putting together the model. The longest part of putting it together had to do with finding a location, because property here in California is very difficult, and finding something that would work. By then, one of the other docs in the community had approached me about trying to do the model, and that was my partner, Dr. Adam Yarme. And so I had to think about a potentially 2 to 4 doc model, thinking if we were going to expand that we could do that in our space. I found the location in July of 2015, and it took us the next 6 months or so to develop out the space. And we opened our doors at the end of February 2016.
I really love how you just explained the entire process from your fee-for-service model to the inception of the idea, and how that really blossomed inside of you and how you made it a reality. with regards to Dr. Yarme, when you opened in February, when did he come on and join you?
He actually physically joined that first week of March. He had approached me when I finally decided, after I'd presented to that other group of the model, and we kind of had a decision from them that they weren't interested in pursuing it. He had communicated with some of those docs and had seen the model, the DPC model, only like a couple of months before he approached me about this model and heard that I was trying to work on it. And this was before I had left the big group. And I said, okay, I can kind of keep you in mind with sort of this development, but you need to kind of understand the time commitment this is going to be, the financing commitment that this may be. And the growth curve is not, your traditional insurance-based growth curve. And that some of these things, even at that time, were still a little bit unknown about what that looks like. Was it 6 months, like the Atlas guys were saying a lot, or was it a couple of years? And it's now become clearer that that is a 3 to 5 year time frame of the growth of a small business, like it does traditionally. But I had him sort of stay in his group, in his model, while I worked on the development. And when it became clear, he actually wound up in the middle of new contract negotiation about 4 or 5 months before we opened. And at that point, finally had to say, no, I'm leaving, and didn't sign the new contract and gave his 90-day notice. And came out of his group in January, had taken a couple months break before starting with me. But we pretty much started in this office together and have grown together, which has been really actually, it's been fun because, we both enjoy the medicine. We cross cover for each other well. We both practice in a similar style. We both have a commitment to the communication that the model requires for our patients. And, we are just enjoying what we've developed and really are thriving. We are not burnout. We are not, so disgruntled with the system that, we're looking to retire soon. We both think that we can continue to function for another decade or so. And hopefully keep growing the model of care.
And what a place to be in now, looking back on where you both have come from. And it really speaks to the power of networking. You spoke to a group of physicians, and not a single person in that group was willing to make that leap. But yet Dr. Yarme had heard about it, and that seed was planted and grew in his head as well. So that is wonderful to hear that you guys are thriving and already in the middle of your 5th year. I want to ask you about your patient load. How many patients do you guys each carry? And how is that working with regards to turnover and or churn with the pandemic especially?
Right now, our totals are, we have around 720 patients. My goal, since I'm sort of it's my primary business, has been always to get Adam up to his sort of target salary and patient population. He's at about 500 right now, and he's close. I'm allowing him the opportunity to say, yes, this is enough load and work versus how much he's earning. And sort of considering a cap of about 700 if anybody went that far, but I don't think we need to, actually. My load right now is about the other 220. And because I'm running the business and because I'm doing a few other things, I still do some work for the Academy. I still do some work for the Medical Society. I think I'm going to stop around 300, 350. I think there's enough work for both of us, and I can do these other things and still earn, some money in the business to be able to accommodate a patient level of about 300 to 350. So we are continuing to grow, and we have some room for growth still. In terms of the churn, typically it does sort of come in waves. We've, usually end of the year, there's a time frame where there's some turnover. The beginning of the school year has traditionally been a time of some turnover. Our average turnover is around 15 to 17%, depending on the month. If you sort of calculate out the numbers, we're typically seeing an increase in patients every month. I think we see maybe 2 months out of the year, 3 months out of the year where we may be down 2 or 3 patients. But in general, we're just having slow, continuous growth. We have not seen any turning with the pandemic. We also have not yet seen any turning with our fires. Which we are sort of trying to prepare for, because we're concerned that some of the individuals in our area who've lost their homes are going to have some difficulty, and we're coming up with sort of options for them in order to sort of maintain the membership for a period of time while they get themselves on their feet. But in general, in March, when the pandemic hit, we had a surge of around 35 to 40 patients come into the office, which was kind of unusual. As the bigger groups around us were restricting access, and that has clearly caused some disgruntled patients in the community, people seeking out to have a better relationship with their physicians. And we've still seen continued growth through this pandemic. We were pretty quick to be able to convert through our Spruce app from our texting platform, which we were using quite a bit in terms of communication and care, right into the telemedicine version of it, to be able to do that type of outreach for our patients. And pretty much just continued with the care that we've been able to provide. We've tried to segregate out in our office a time frame for the potentially sick people coming in, in the afternoon, and keeping our well people in the morning, to at least stratify a little bit the workflow that comes into the office. We're overall in the office seeing probably fewer patients than we were prior to the pandemic, but we're still seeing a volume of phone call, texting, and telemed that was similar to prior of the pandemic itself. So we've just continued to thrive through it, which is a little bit surprising, but at the same time, we are that type of model where the access is really important to patients, and the relationship is important as well.
It's absolutely true. That relationship is paramount, especially where patients now are realizing, like you just said, when a clinic or a corporation especially puts limits on who can and cannot come into the clinic, or what you can and cannot see as a doctor in a fee-for-service model, and then they find an option like your DPC where they don't have to worry about anybody, a corporation, someone who's not even a doctor, telling their doctor how they have access or not. I want to go back to that relationship, especially when it comes to the fact that you also take care of your patients in the hospital. I'm assuming that some of your patients weren't even used to having a doctor that saw them in both the outpatient and inpatient settings.
Correct. Yes. No, part of that is my commitment has always been the continuity of care. I've always felt that that's the important thing that I bring as a family physician to the relationship, and that my job is to coordinate that care across all of these lovely silos that we're all having to deal with. And I've maintained my privileges all the way through. And even when I started this practice, it was clear that a lot of people in the model either lose their privileges or, wind up deciding that they're done with the hospital component. So I was prepared that if we were doing better care for patients, maybe we would eventually not have our numbers to be able to do the work in the hospital. And, that was part of my planning. That, okay, if that occurs, then we can do social visits and we can still try to keep some connection with the hospitalists. to maintain some of that continuity, but that the continuity was the important feature. What we've seen is two things. We have about 25% of our patients are Medicare patients. Many of them are coming to us because they've been in the hospital. They've had to deal with the hospitalist scenario, the transitions in care where nobody's really telling anybody what went on or what's going on, or who's really in charge. And when they hear that we are still maintaining that continuity, they're relieved, and that's one of their major motivations for being a part of our practice. Because of that, and because we still have our privileges, we've seen a higher acuity in our practice. And we're still doing several admissions a month. And our patients are extremely thankful that we're the ones following through with what is going on in the hospital setting. So it's allowed us to have, we are seeing more complexity because of this work. We think that we are attracting people who have the need to have someone support them through, the silos of care, and are super appreciative of the fact that we're the ones who show up in the ER and get them into the hospital and follow it through.
Too often we see huge gaps in a patient's care, especially between an inpatient and an outpatient setting. Medicines that are, not reconciled, medicines that are prescribed, but there's no way that they can get the medication filled by the time that they're supposed to transition back to the outpatient setting. That lack of continuity in care has created such a big problem, especially for those people who were so used to having a single physician manage their care, whether they were, in a hospital or not. So that's fantastic that you guys are able to still maintain that continuity.
Yes, I mean, we kind of go through phases where it is more work. It is dealing with a different system. And that system does have its own barriers that we have to work through. But again, the reward is the patients get better care and the transitions are far better managed, and we're in charge of that, which, is a win all the way around. And they are just so appreciative of our work there.
Absolutely. And, this goes back to your statement about how you guys are no longer in the burnout category, thinking that you're going to have to retire soon just because you can't take it anymore. How rewarding is that for a patient to, join on your practice, and you have that relationship? That's what the model of DPC is fantastic at developing. And you've done that, and there's people who truly appreciate that, and you see that every day.
I have become a huge fan of podcasts. Ever since Sarah Koenig hosted the first season of Serial, I was hooked. Now, creating this podcast has become part of my daily life. While it is an exciting new hobby, I also see it as a privilege that I get to interview so many DPC and direct care doctors. If you are interested in starting a podcast, let me tell you a little bit about Anchor. First of all, it's free. There are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast as well with no minimum listenership. It's basically everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
I want to ask about, with you having seen an acuity, an increase in acuity with regards to those Medicare patients specifically, have you ever had to raise your prices?
So one of the other things that happened this year, because we were kind of coming into our 5th year and we had not raised our prices at all up to this point, we did at the end of January make the announcement that we were going to increase our prices in April. And we sent all the notices out. We made sure everybody was aware of that. We got, and we were prepared for some pushback, and we had the numbers all calculated out. If we lost 10%, if we lost 20%, we had all of that as a business sort of calculated. But we had, a few people who said, oh, prices are going up. Maybe this isn't for us. But in general, and then the pandemic hit. In general, we had really no pushback on that at all, which was kind of amazing. We sort of had the debate after we had set it in motion whether we should go ahead with it. But, part of me at the same time was, this is sort of the way the business needs to structure itself, and this is appropriate for an increase irrespective of where we were at with the situation in the country. And we did fine. And very few people, many people came and said, oh, you guys are worth it. And, continued on. And that was the feedback we were getting. Very few people came forward and said, no, this is too expensive. So
the fact that you got that feedback that you are worth it, it really just hammers home how valuable this model is and how valuable each of us are as doctors who are leaving fee-for-service and entering the DPC world. So congratulations on that. That is fantastic. And I love that you mentioned that so other people can potentially get some confidence from your experience.
Oh, yeah, correct. I mean, I looked through, the Facebook pages and things on how people have adapted. And many people who've done this either do it in a consistent pattern or when they do it in a chunk like we've done it, have done pretty well with it, because the model is really cost effective and really not that expensive overall. And people recognize the worth.
Absolutely. I want to go now to a patient who is just joining the practice. When you have meet and greets for yourself and Dr. Yarme, how does that look like for a patient from the website going forward to meeting you or Dr. Yarme?
When they schedule into the website, we have the staff call to arrange and verify the scheduling. Then the staff will send the packet of paperwork that we have, or we tell the patient that that's available on the website if they're interested, or even offer that if they want to fill it out in the office, they can do it there. The meet and greet is a 30-minute appointment that's free. It's our attempt to make sure and ensure that patients understand the model, how it functions, answer any questions they have about it or the paperwork, in order to make sure that they're truly interested and understand what our processes are and how we are different from what's available in fee-for-service. Usually we will go through the paperwork with them at that time as well. Some people will fill it out immediately and leave it. Some people will take it home, go through it, fill it out, and bring it back in. And then once they've established all that paperwork, then we bring them in for their formal first new patient visit.
One of the forms available on your website is your patient doctor contract or your patient practice contract. Some people have that readily available, especially in California. Other DPCs don't have that accessible or available prior to signing on to the practice. What was your thought process behind posting the contract on your website?
Well, the DPC movement has been very much rooted in transparency. And that's why our pricing is online. So part of that is making sure that patients have access to what that contract looks like, and that's a critical part of the transparency of the model. So they can kind of review it on their own. They can ask us questions if there's any specific concerns. So that's all been a part of what we consider important. That's why we have the meet and greet, in order to make it really clear this is how it works, and make sure that all questions are answered about the model before they sign up.
With regards to getting the word out about the practice, having patients leave reviews for the care that you and Dr. Yarme provide, how do you encourage patients to leave reviews for you both?
Well, we have had some of that work through the website with our current website structure, and we are in the process of changing that this month. So we're not so much encouraging, through the website at the moment. However, I would agree. When I came into this model, everyone sort of said the majority of your advertising is going to be your patient population. And while when I started, I did do a little dabbling here and there in advertising. Both, I put one ad in the paper because our newspaper, this area in Santa Cruz has a very large geriatric population, retired population that's part of the community. They all still read their newspapers. So I thought, okay, well, we'll do a little bit of advertising there, a little bit of advertising in some of these, area local magazines. And I found overall that most of that was really not as helpful. That it really is the care that you give in the word of mouth between patients and their friends and family that brings patients into your practice. The only other advertising thing that I have to say has been helpful is the local NPR radio station, where you're able to actually put a little, it's not really an ad, it's considered an underwriting tab, a 15-second little spiel on what, who you are and to call or to see the website. And that's actually brought patients to us, but it's also engaged the physician community, which is kind of interesting because they're all in their cars traveling. Most people around here listen to the NPR station. And they ask questions about, well, how are you doing? What is it you're doing? How are things going? I hear you on the radio. And, it's like an introduction to further discovery of what it is we're doing and how we're functioning. So, but I would have to say the majority of what your referral base is really not going to be so much that advertising. It's going to be your patients telling others that they appreciate what you're doing and the care you're giving.
Going back to the fact that you are still active in other organizations, specifically the Academy and the California branch of the Academy, is there movement in the Academy to strengthen the DPC model?
I think at the national level, there's a lot of support. I think when I was at that second DPC, the second National DPC Summit was the first time the Academy had come forward to support the model, which also sort of fed into my decision that it was, here's now a national organization that recognizes the worth, and it was worth it to move forward in the development. From the state, the Academy does use me a little bit as a resource, so I do get referrals of people that have called the state chapter and want information. I was at that table. They've asked me every year to be at that DPC table in order to have a discussion about the model and answer any questions. Outside of that, there's not a whole lot of organizing going on from the state side in terms of the model itself. There's because of, I know the movement about trying to get each state to acknowledge the model as a medical model in order to help with some of the payment models and the HSAs. I think California's going to be sort of the slowest to the table on that, only because there is a large amount of regulation. There is a very large movement to go to a universal healthcare process. We have a large insurance exchange organization. So there are things that are potential roadblocks for the development of our model. But I think, as a group, we in the state, we do exchange ideas when we come together in some of these, the DPC Summit, the HINT Summit meetings, and we do occasionally talk to one another about how things are going and what's going on in the state. That we're maintaining some level of collaboration as individual DPC practices. But in terms of sort of general organization, there hasn't really been a more formal process like there is in some of the other states.
it's very interesting that even though states are on different levels with regards to DPC, acceptance of DPC, prevalence of DPC, I am very reassured that the number of DPC practices is growing every year. And the number of residencies that I'm learning about that incorporate exposure to business or direct primary care as a model, then those numbers are even increasing. Just in Northern California, where I'm located, I learned that 3 residencies who had not been incorporating DPC are now incorporating some kind of clinical rotation or clinical exposure to the DPC world. And that was unheard of. I had never heard of DPC until way after residency graduation. So I hope that we all hope that the movement continues and that we continue to strengthen our numbers so that we can continue to get the word out, whether that be on an NPR, a 15-second advertisement, or whether that be, speaking to each other over the phone or through a podcast. But I definitely am encouraged with the numbers of practices that are opening up every year.
No, I would agree with that. And I do think it's actually, our responsibility as a movement to be accessible to those residency programs. We've had residents rotate at our office from the Natividad program in Salinas on their practice management rotation. And, it's amazing the reaction that they first of all recognize that there's something other than what they're being prepared for in these large groups that's available to be able to practice medicine. And, several of them, take on sort of that entrepreneurial, business model thought process, and you can see the gears moving, as they're saying, is this how you did it? How did you put this together, and maybe be able to see a different business model than being sort of stuck with contracting in a large group scenario. So I do think it's super important that we all provide that accessibility to be able to get them to see the model before they're cemented into some of these large group tracks where they wind up often having, what I call the golden handcuffs of the work in those groups, and at the same time wind up burning out because of that. So, I consider that a critical part of what we do to support the residents and to support the model.
Before I forget, I want to ask about an experience that you had early on in your DPC, in that you had water damage to the building, even though your building was fairly new at the time. Can you tell us how you guys got through that water damage in the hopes that potentially someone else who's in a build out right now or is looking to build out could benefit from your experience?
It's important because the one thing that did save us with all of that was that we did have insurance for the business itself, and that paid for the water damage that occurred. And that was at the end of our first or second year. So it was a brand new building, brand new build out. And the whole back half of our build out was saturated with water.
Yeah.
And so we tried to function in the front section of our office with these huge sheets of plastic for about 4 or 5 months while we dried the whole thing down and had to reconstruct what had been newly constructed, which was kind of the sad thing. And while we did wind up paying, I think I wound up paying a few $1,000s, the majority of all of that was covered by the business insurance. So that was actually super important to have.
Do you have any tech or tools that you use and love?
We love using the Hint platform, Hint Health platform, for our billing and membership, and how well it integrates with our other software packages. We love Spruce as a texting platform, and now our telemedicine platform to help with communication with our patients.
And what about a resource or resources that you would recommend to others in addition to what you've already mentioned?
I think that there are excellent resources at the DPC Alliance site, DPC Alliance, I think it's alliance.org, where there is a consortium of DPC physicians who are ready and willing to help with education and are accessible for questions and teaching. I think in general, the movement has been that way. I think that was one of the things that attracted me to it as well, is that everybody's very giving in helping to support each other and, give ideas back and forth and how people achieved, one thing versus another. So the DPC Alliance is an excellent group of physicians. Phil Eskew's site, the DPC Frontier site, has actually locations of clinics. So if you do find someone, I would recommend calling anybody that's local to you if you're interested in putting this model together. I've had plenty of docs reach out throughout the state to me, each with kind of a different variation or a way of that they're trying to set things up and asking questions about how did you do this? How did you do that? Is there other ways of doing things? And why did you make these choices? So you can get some of that information and then some good legal information from DPC Frontier. And then the AAFP MIG, the MIG for DPC, and the group is run by Bethany Burke through the Academy, can also provide some good information with posting questions and asking members as well.
Perfect. And I will make sure that those links are accompanying your blog post that goes along with the podcast, and it will be available for anyone to click on those links as well. If you were to give a sentiment of encouragement to somebody who was interested in the model, like you were when you had first heard about it at the national conference, and that word of encouragement would be something that a person could keep in their mind and in their heart going into their future, what would that sentiment be?
Wow, this is the medicine that you trained for. This is the medicine that you wrote in your medical school application statement. This is such a rewarding and amazing method of the professionalism of medicine that it is so worth it to take that step. I recognize it is a leap of faith, I have to say. It took me many months to come up with saying, oh yeah, this is worth now trying to put this together and try it. But once you've stepped off of the hamster medicine wheel, you realize not only what real poor care you were giving in that model, but how much richer care and better relationships and truly satisfying the quadruple aim that the DPC model provides. And you'll never regret stepping off and taking that leap of faith.
Thank you so much, Dr. Janine, for joining us today.
You are welcome, Maryal.
Next week, look forward to hearing from Dr. Lauren Hughes of Bloom Pediatrics and Lactation. Until then, this is Maryal Concepcion. For more information on this episode and much more, please visit mydpcstory.wixsite.com/mysite. That's mydpcstory.wixsite.com/MYSITE.